Welcome everyone. This is Juan Soto, Microsoft Access MVP, now 14 years in a row. And this is part 3 of Access with SQL Server Academy. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about views, store procedures, linking tables, and more about the SQL Server Management Studio, how you're going to effectively use SQL Server Management Studio to manage your project in SQL Server. Now, last month we talked about migrating your data with the SQL Server Migration Assistant for Access, or SSMA for short. And in that tutorial, we talked about how I don't recommend you move the queries over. We talked about how you can create a report to identify issues for tables that can't be migrated, such as tables that have the field types that are not supported by SQL Server. A good example of that is the field type attachment. And so it's important that you run the report and see which tables don't migrate, and then you can fix those tables and then migrate over. We also talked about how you want to save your project so that you can do updates to the data through the life of the project. So when the client gives you a database to convert, you're going to want to migrate that to Azure or to SQL Server Express or whatever it is. And then that might take you weeks, it might take you months. And when you're ready to do beta testing, it's old data because in the meantime, they've been using the Access application, right? And so the customer wants to test with the most recent data. You would use SQL Server Migration Assistant to migrate that data, update it in the cloud. And I actually showed you an example of that. We actually went in there and modified a record, and we were able to push that record modification to SQL Server using update. So without further ado, I'm going to share my VM. Yeah, let's get into it. This is a hands-on. Hopefully you can follow along with me at home and share. Meanwhile, I want to be able to bring up the list of participants so I can admit people to the meeting as needed. And I want to see the chat. So let me bring up the chat. Make sure that I can see your questions, right? In the chat. Okay, I am ready. All right, you should be able to see my screen. So I already have SQL Server Migration Assistant, SQL Server Management Studio, which is SSMS, loaded and logged into my local server. I already have 3 databases here. Now I'm going to launch SQL Server Migration Assistant for Access. I'm going to close this wizard. We'll go to the File menu, Recent Projects, and I'll just load the most recent one. And what that does, it remembers your Access database. Now, if you move your Access database, it won't find it, so you may have to relink it again. Here it is. And last time I only migrated tables, so that's why all the tables are selected. And now I need to reconnect to SQL Server. I'm running a local server with 127.0.1, and I am going to use Windows Authentication and log in. Great, I'm logged into my SQL Server. So one of the advantages is of SQL Server Migration Assistant, it will actually link these tables back to your front end. So I'm gonna open my Access database and show you that it's still linked with the tables, right? The old tables here. So let me open this up. I'm gonna use the Shift key to bypass the login code. See here, and then let's enable that. Okay. So as you can see, it's still the old Access tables. Now, usually you would have a back end, front end, right? And you would create a new front end, a new back end file, excuse me, and link the tables there. But I'll just go ahead and say, let's keep it all here. I'm gonna close that. Now I'm gonna right click on these tables in the assistant and I'm gonna link the tables. Okay, it's gonna ask me to log in. I'm gonna say Windows integrated. Click on OK. and it links all the tables. Now I could have linked the tables, but I did this way to prove a point. I'm gonna go back into, so it's linking backup complete, which is great. We'll go back into Access. Now the reason I close Access is I want to avoid clashes with the actual file being open, right? So I close the Access and I'll open it again. And notice now I have all my SQL Server tables linked here, and the old table is renamed. Now, one advantage of using this approach is if you have a relationship diagram, right, it doesn't give you an error message like it would if you have a relational diagram. So let's go ahead and bring up the relational diagram. Here's the relational diagram. This is all the old tables, not the new tables in SQL Server. You would want to recreate this in SQL Server if you wanted to go through that trouble, right? You would have to create that. So that's a topic for another day. Now, what I've done here is I've done what's called DSN lists, linking, table linking. DSN lists, table linking, which means I did not create a DSN in Windows, named it, and then used that to link the tables from SQL Server to Access. So it's a really handy way to go ahead and do that. I could also go back to the wizard and then right click and unlink the table, so I'm not going to do that. It's a handy little feature. Today I'm going to show you how to create query views. What are views? Views are just nothing more than queries in SQL Server. They call them views, and Access we call them queries. So I'm going to go in, and I told you last time I don't like converting all my queries over to SQL Server views because it's easier for me to manage those queries and Access. The only time you would create a query in SQL Server is because of performance issues, right? I said my base of performance is 3 seconds. 1001, 1002, 1003, my query is done. I can tolerate that. There are some clients who in the past have told me that's too slow. I'm like, come on, man. 3 seconds is too slow. You know, if you want to pay me to convert these queries to get it to 1 second, I'm okay with that, but I think it's a waste of resources. And so, for example, I know this query won't convert, and the reason is because it's using a function called year. Now, if I right-click on this query, and by the way, Jeff has a question, how did I get rid of DBO? That was done automatically by the SQL Server Migration Assistant. It didn't include the DBO there, Jeff. So if I click on Create Report, I know this is going to cause problems because of that function, and indeed it shows you here. Following SQL statement is not supported and cannot be converted. Which one? Well, the year function, right? The year function is not compatible. We're going to get back to that in a second here. But first, I am going to find a function that can be converted and show you how it looks. Let's see here. I believe this one worked fine. Let me just check. Yeah, this one worked fine. So now I'm going to click on right-click, Create Report. Now, you know, this one is also having a problem. Let's see. Synchronization may run with errors because column names may repeat in the star expression. Okay, that's not a problem, right? Because basically I'm returning all the columns from orders. But it's using another query called query CBO employees. And since that query is not in SQL Server, that's going to be an issue, right? You're looking at another query for another query. Query linking is supported in SQL Server Migration, SQL Server, but you would have to do that creating the views before that, right? So that's another not good candidate. So I'm just going to close that and let's go on to another query. All right, let's see this one. This is a very simple query. This shouldn't be a problem, but I'll go ahead and run the report anyway. Let me uncheck the other ones, by the way. I don't have to check it to run the report. So I'm going to right click on this query, create report. I would not normally create a view, right? Now, what I like about this is it actually gives you a syntax to create this query in SQL Server. And not sure why it's showing this number there. That's interesting. What's with the ties? I'm not sure, but we'll go ahead and create the view and then see how it looks on the other side. So I'm going to create this, convert, load, and migrate. Actually, probably, okay, I may be misunderstanding this. This is my problem because I don't usually use, here we go. Okay, views, there is the create a view, right? The view doesn't exist here, not found, which is good, all right? I'm gonna click on OK. Yeah, was not being because no objects were selected. I don't need to do the convert, load, and migrate because there is no table, so probably could have gotten away with just using convert schema, maybe. Anyway, let me go back to my SQL Server Migration, SQL Server Management Studio. Oh, I have two copies open. Let me close one of them. Cancel. You can load multiple copies of SQL Server Management Studio. I'm going to go into my NW Test 3 views, and there's my view I just created. If I right click on it, select Design View, I have this query by example, very similar to what you would use in Access. But this one, I love this one for several reasons. Number one is I can modify this, right? I can say, okay, let's say for example, I want product code. Notice that when I click on product code, add it to the QBE, right? Query by example grid here, it automatically modifies the SQL code. So it's a great way to see the code, and that's another way to learn T-SQL. T-SQL is the language of querying a SQL Server. If I then want to come in here and say, okay, you know what, I don't want to call this unit price, I want to call this price. Give it another name, alias, right? And then here, notice that it says unit price as price. Now, if I come in here in the code and delete it, it would make the change up here above as well. So notice they made the change up here as well. So either you modify it down here or you modify it up here. It's relational, right? It'll do that. Okay? Okay. So this is my query, right? Now, I always caution people, when you create a view in SQL Server, I always say know the answer before you ask the question. What do I mean by that? You want to run your results in Access, compare those results in SQL Server. Make sure they match. There's no guarantee. The last thing you want to do is assume that they're identical outputs and then create a report for management only to find out that the report is incorrect and then you end up with egg on your face because of not checking the query. How do you know the answer? You run the query in Access first. You see how many rows are returned. All right, that's a very simple check. Run the query in SQL Server Management Studio, SSMS. Make sure the same amount of rows. Sometimes I export the results to Excel. If there's calculations, I compare the totals of each column versus the total SQL Server. Hey, you do what you got to do. Because when I hand in that report, I know it's correct. And when the customer says, did you check it? I can say, yes, I did check it. All right. So I'm going to run this query here. Select top 1,000 rows. And there's my query. You'll notice here how many seconds it took. 0 seconds, right? 43 rows. Very nice stuff. Okay, so I have never tried this. Let me go try this now. I'm going to, well, it won't let me link it. So how do I link this view back into Access? So I'm going to go back into Access here. Close the relationship. External data, link to a manager. I already have this SQL Server. Because I added tables before, I can do this. So now I come in here, hit the plus here, right? And now I want to add. So it says data source name. I don't want to do this. Let me see if there's a way I can use this. I usually have code that adds my views to the server. Let's see here. Okay, let's do it some other way. Let's see here. External data, new data source from database, from SQL Server. Import, no, I want a link. Click on OK. Okay, now it's creating the DSN, which is what I wanted to avoid. But you would create a DSN, right? And then use that DSN to add your view. Click on OK. All right, let's see here. I want to create a new one. So I'm going to say new, and I'm going, okay. So this is a first gotcha. Every machine, every Windows copy comes with this really old driver. Don't ever use this driver. It's old, it's deprecated. Even Microsoft tells you not to use it, all right? So that's the first gotcha. Do not use that old ass driver. Now I have ODBC driver 17, which is a modern driver for ODBC. If you use that old driver, and this is one of the things that we do when we do an audit for customers. Customer hires us and says, hey, can you audit operations and make sure you follow best standards, right? That's one of the things we do. What kind of driver they have. Sometimes they have, I've seen ODBC driver 11, right, which is six versions older. I'm going to click on next. Type the name, all right? I'm going to say NW test 3. Next. All right, finish. How do you want to describe? Okay, I'm just going to put the name of the database, database test 3. We'll pick that local server. Let's see if it finds it. That's another issue. Will it find that server? Now, this is the problem with creating DSNs, is that you have to create that DSN at every workstation that you work with, right? So if you have 20 employees, you got to go to every workstation, create this DSN. This is why I don't recommend DSN. Let me see, I think the local IP address is 127. Let me see here. Yeah, I believe it was 127.00.1, but let me double check. Yeah, 127.0.0.1, 1433. Okay, let's go back to access. Let's see if that's just enough. You don't have to put the 0.0.1. See if it refines it. 0.0.1. Integrate Windows Authentication, that's correct. Change the default database, that's important. I want to do that. This is where my first check to see if it finds the server. It did. Now I pick that database. I'll click on next. And then in the past, it would allow me to test it. Not sure why it's not allowing me to test it, but I'm just going to click next and finish. Oh, here it is. Okay, I want to test the data source. That's good, right? You want to make sure that your DSN connects to SQL Server. Click on OK. And OK. All right, and now I've got my DSN, right? And let's see if it, okay, here, great. And now I can find my view and import that view. So here's the view, query, products. Click on OK. Now, when you create a view and you link it to SQL Server this way, there is no key index on views in SQL Server unless you create them. You can create an index on a view. This is an advanced topic, but you're going to run into what's called a non-deterministic index. Basically, SQL Server doesn't know if that index is going to be valid every time you run it, because by definition, the view can return different results. So, but you can, when you do it here in Access, create that index a local index. And I can go ahead and pick this field and create a local index. Why would you want to do this? You don't have to do it if you don't want to. But by doing it this way, you can now edit the data in the view in Access. Views, by definition, are read-only. That's another gotcha. You can, listen to me on this one, it's going to come in handy later. You can edit data in view if you add an index to the view at the moment you link it here. All right, so I'm going to click on OK. Now I've got my view. Now I want to make sure, see, this is the DBO thing, right? That Jeff mentioned earlier. So let me see if I can just rename it. Let me rename it to get the DBO out. Let's see. Oh, okay. It won't let me because I got a existing name. So let me just go ahead and query. Let me just go ahead and just leave a D in there for now. So normally I would delete the old query in Access, right? And I would do this, but I'll just leave it there. So when I double click here, run it, I see this here. I come down here to the bottom, right? And maybe I want to add a new product, okay? And so I can do that here if I wanted to. If I don't have that key I showed you earlier from Access, it would have been read-only. Okay. Now, why is that important? Because if you bind the view to a form that is used for data entry, you want to be able to edit the data. Okay, so if you bind the view to the form, you want to be able to edit the data, you have to add the index. If you do not have to edit the data, for example, if you're using that view in the report, you don't have to worry about that. You can just cancel the creation of the index and just link it here. To access, here's another tip. For access, a view is considered a table. So Access doesn't know that this is a view. All it knows is it's an object that looks like a table. That's why these symbols for tables, SQL Server tables, are the same. There is no difference between a view and a table in Access. The other aspect of this is I can give it a custom name in Access, right? Separate from my SQL Server, so I can call whatever I want in SQL Server and then rename it here, and which I've done in the past. And usually when I create a view in SQL Server, I use the VW underscore moniker and then the view name. And then I'll link it here. And if I'm replacing the query, I'll leave the query name the way it was. That way I don't have to worry about reports that reference a query. I don't have to worry about other queries that reference a query. It's just an enjoyable experience. Okay. So if I want to go back into, so I'm going to close the migration assistant. We're done for this for now. I did want to show you that problem with that query, right? All right, let's go to that query. Let's see, I think it was this one, query sales year to date. Our first use of AI tonight. So I'm going to, let's see, this one, the report, create report. All right, doesn't like, the following SQL Server is not supported, right? I know it's the year thing, right? So I'm gonna go back to Access here, back to the SQL Server Migration Assistant. And I'm going to click, all right, I'm gonna open that query. Let's see if it lets me do that here. No, it doesn't look like I can. All right, so this is the old one here, queries TBO products. I'm gonna go back into Access. I'm gonna get that query syntax, query sales year to date. Query sales year to date. Let me just do the QRY because it's late in the day. My eyes are tired. Been working on the monitor. This is why I don't game on my PC anymore because my eyes need a rest. All right, so I'm gonna grab the SQL syntax from here. I'm gonna copy this. I got the Monaco editor. All right, I'm gonna copy this, and now I'm going to open my trusted AI system. Doesn't matter which one you use. I use Gemini. I have already an account with Gemini. You can use Copilot, Claude, ChatGPT, whatever is your favorite muse. So I'm gonna go to Gemini, google.com. Convert this Access query to SQL Server syntax so that it will create a view with the name. Now, what's the name of the query in Access? QRY sales underscore YTD. I'll go back into QRY sales YTD. I think it's underscore sales YTD or something like that. Let me just double check again. Gosh, my memory is one touch to me. Okay, so the underscore is on the YTD. Sales underscore YTD. And then I got paste, right, the query in there. And let it rip. Jan, you said yes. What was the yes to? I forgot the question. Now, what I like about this is it actually adds a create view statement, replacing specific date function with the SQL Server get date, which was the issue in question. And then you have this little, so the query, you got, okay, thank you, John. Then I got this little icon here where I can copy this here, go to SQL Server, and then the next tip, Control N. Control N creates a new query window, Control V. Now notice you make sure that you're in the right table, right database. You don't want to create queries or views in the wrong database. Okay? I can then check the syntax. Syntax good. Execute. And this create a view. Now another tip is I can highlight just the query and just run the query. And I got my order total. What did I say about this before? Know the answer before you run the query. So now I'm going to run the same query in Access, and I should get 46,232.96. So I'm going to go in the query in Access. And it's the same number, right? I know it's a simple query. I know it's probably no big deal, but I just want to make a point because I have had employees in the past work on complex queries, and it's happened to all of us, right? We created a view and it was wrong. Okay, so now if I need to refresh this view, so I'm gonna click on here, right click, I'm gonna click on refresh. And now my other view will show up here after it refreshes. So highlighting in SQL Server SQL Server Studio is really good, right? Because then I can execute sections of the query if need be. I don't know why it's taking so long. It could be that. Let me just remove this query. I don't think it's got a lock. I'm gonna say no. I don't think it's got a lock on the table. Still, all right, here we go. Finally got it there. All right, so here it is. Query sales year to date. So that's a great instance on how do you use AI. Now, querying, designing queries is, I call it a little bit of artistry, right? Because you can create a complex query, I can create a complex query. They may not be identical, but they both achieve the same results. Because query language is not as precise, right, as one would hope. A very complex query can take many different forms, different ways of doing things, and you just don't achieve the same results. AI, as good as it is, can make mistakes. That's why you always trust but verify. That's another tip here. Trust but verify at all times. You're starting to learn now the syntax in SQL Server. To create a view, I use the create keyword, right? Create space view. As you can imagine, I can create a table this way. I can create a table by supplying the DDO command of create table and all that. Not that I would do that this tonight because it's probably easier to just right click here and create a new table in my database, right? New table here. But this is how I learned, right? How to properly do things here with SQL Server. And I know that get date is the same thing as date and SQL and Access. Now, here's one little thing. So I can say select get date and just run the get date's misspelled. I can just run this statement and get today's date. So this is the kind of stuff I wish Access would do, right? In terms of having separate. I have not played around with Monaco. It could be that Monaco can do this for you, but I kind of love the fact that you can select the partial statement and be able to run that in SQL Server. Okay. Now, one thing that you're going to find when you create views in SQL Server is I often get the question, why bother? Why bother creating the view, right? For number one, speed. But number two, speed actually improves over time. Let me say this again. The speed of the query execution in SQL Server will improve over time. Now, let's say, for example, you have a much more complex system that you created. You create this view, and you use this view in your application extensively, right? A good example of that might be orders, right? By date range, or just a list of orders with the salesman name and so forth. I mean, you probably use that query everywhere in your system, or a list of products, or what have you. And by creating a view, you create an execution plan with that view, and it gets stored with the query. Now, when I create this view, I can actually see the execution plan by holding the query, selecting the view, and pressing Control L as in Larry. I can see this execution plan. I don't ever modify the execution plan. I don't have millions and millions of rows in my query, in my tables. And if I ever did need the execution plan modifications, I would probably hire a DBA or use one of my DBAs on staff to do it for me. But what I do like about this is if there was a missing index, it would tell me that here. Say you may want to add an index. But back to my original point, why does it go faster over time? Because SQL Server, when it sees multiple people asking for the same view over and over again, will keep that view in memory along with the execution plan, to the point that once it starts seeing that query being used often, it will keep it in memory and execution is a lot faster. What happens when it's not in memory? It's got to read it from disk, load into memory, execute the plan. If it's in memory, it just goes straight to plan execution. Now, when you create a view, when you create a query in Access against SQL Server tables, there is no stored execution plan, but it does create an execution plan on the fly. That's why when you're debating whether or not to create a view in SQL Server, you're going to ask yourself, okay, do I want to take advantage of memory and be able to say, create this view because it's going to improve with performance. It's going to store the execution plan, and it's going to show me any indexes that are missing. Always important to keep that in mind when it comes to optimizing Access with SQL Server. Now, I've been doing this for a good part of 15 years now. We're known worldwide as experts on optimizing Access with SQL Server, but remember one thing. Access was not around. It was around before SQL Server existed, right? Before there was ever SQL Server, before there was ever internet, before when I had hair on my head, there was Access, right? And so when it comes to query performance, right, you need to tweak things to make it work better with SQL Server. Remember, let's go back to the first class, the first month. I made a statement that people assume I'll just move the data to SQL Server and then I'll be fine. That's not always the case. It's not. You need to optimize with views and stored procedures, additional indexes, right? And be able to leverage the muscle, which is SQL Server. You want processing to always occur on SQL Server for the most part, especially, in particular, tip number 14 tonight, if it's stored in Azure. If the data is in Azure, what are you looking at? Right now, I'm in Chicago. I'm running this VM in Chicago. I'm actually in Puerto Rico right now for the winter, but I'm running this VM in Chicago. The data center is in Dallas. And so you've got that hop between my machine in Chicago and the data center in Dallas. And so you've got to be able to optimize operations, because if it's too slow, what is the customer going to have, or what are your coworkers going to do? They're not going to use it. They're going to complain to management. Oh, Juan did this and now it's slower. How is this an improvement? We went from Guatemala to Guatapeor. That's a Spanish joke in there for you, because mala is bad in English, in Spanish. And how is this an improvement, right? And now I've got to justify my work to my client or my peers if I'm not a consultant, I work somewhere. By the way, since this view has already been created, I get this error message, right? Because it's already done that. All right, so I created a view. Now I need to modify it. I'm not going to save this. I need to modify it. So I'm going to create this view. Well, I might click on the view, and I'm going to click on design. right? This is one way of modifying it. Right? So here I can come in here, I can click to change the relationship, right? I can select all rows from order, select all rows from out order details, right? I can change the join, and now here is it's outer join right here, right? And then I can just not save it, close and not save it. That's one way. The other way would be to go to script view as, alter to new query editor window. So these menus, these right-click menus in SQL Server Management Studio are really nice because I can create, right? Script view, create to, new query editor window, alter to, new query editor window, create, alter to, drop and create to, and so forth. So let me just do this, alter to. And now here, notice that it's going to always default to as W2, which is save my hide a lot, right? When you use this use statement, it forces the query to run inside that database. When you have multiple databases like I have now here, only 2, 3, 1, 2, and 3, and I didn't bother selecting my database here, I created an object in the wrong database. So using the use statement has saved my hide quite a lot. All right. And now I'm using the alter view thing. Why is it invalid object name? DBO query sales here today. Why does it give me that? Interesting. Object name from sales. Okay, so why is it doing that? Object name. I got query sales here today. Here, let's go ahead and erase this. The squiggly lines are great because it tells me. So I'm gonna say QRY. Let me see, DBO.QRY. Let's see if I get intelligence to come up. Sales underscore YTD. Let me check. All right, it's good. Not sure why I'm getting the squiggly there, but when I checked it was good. All right, so let me see, control. No, I don't want to do that. Okay. So great. So I make a change, right? And let's say, for example, I want to say as order total 2. I don't know. Order to 2. I'm going to change the query. And then when I run this query here, by just selecting the query, I can double check the results, right? When I'm ready to alter the view, what do I execute? I can just execute this entire statement block by clicking on execute. And now it's completed successfully. In fact, I can keep running this and it will get completed successfully because I'm altering the view, the same thing. I'm not kicking any changes. I'm just doing that. So I'm gonna go ahead and replace this 2 again. Execute here. So you can right click. There's several ways to modify a view. You can right click, select design view. You can right click, create, right design, or you can go to script view as, create to, alter to, excuse me, new query window. Whatever your preference is. Sometimes do it this way, right? Because it allows me to select parts of the query. If I have a multiple complex query, I can do it this way. It's just over time I've preferred this, right? When I first started, like you guys, I was doing the other one because it looked like Access, right? When I right click design view, it looked like the query by example in Access. All right, I'm gonna stop here before we continue. Any questions so far? Views, linking views, using them as read-only or modifying them to create an index, right? I have a blog post, by the way. If you go to, let me put it in here, message here. If you go to accessexperts.com/start here, there is a blog post on how to create the index in your code when you link a view. Any questions? No? Okay. All right. Let's keep going. Ooh, let me just grab something to drink real quick. All right. So think about the order of things that you need to do in order to deliver that first beta, right, of your conversion to SQL Server. You already uploaded the tables. You linked those tables back to Access. You've identified queries that needed to be created views. You create those queries, views, excuse me, in SQL Server. You verify the results. You link them back. What else? Well, you need to run the program. You need to run the forms, the reports, see which one is causing slowness. Now, this is Northwest, and it's got a very small amount of records. And for the most part, when you first create a new, let's say for example, somebody hires you to create a new database from scratch. Well, there's not going to be a ton of records to begin with unless you import them from an older system or from Excel. And even then, it might not be something that the SQL Server just laugh at. Just execute the query with a duration of 0.00 seconds. So you fall into this trap that I did a great job here, right? Queries are running great, views are running wonderful. Of course, there's no data, right? And then until you get a call a year later from the customer. And they'll say, hey, Juan, I noticed that this report, it used to be quick when you first started the system. Now it's taking a lot longer, right? And when you dig deeper, you realize that the report could benefit from a view, or the report can benefit from a secondary index, right? And those things are harder to do and to test for when you're creating a new database from scratch. How can I get it so that, how can I test the performance SQL Server versus Access? Now, sometimes that performance will actually be detrimental in a new database if you're using Azure because you got that hop, right, between your PC and the data center. And if you notice a performance issue right off the bat in a brand new database with little data, you really screwed up, right? Think about that. You create a new database in Azure. It's a brand new application. There's no prior history. And it's already slow, right? So you know that you're probably missing some primary indexes somewhere. Something is happening. You're using the wrong driver. Something very egregious is happening there. That's affecting your performance. Performance issues is what's going to eat up your budget in these projects. Because now we got AI to create stored procedures. We got AI to create functions and so forth. And so it used to be that you would spend a lot more time creating stored procedures and views than you would normally would nowadays. Where was this stuff 5 years ago? I asked myself. All right, good. So the next step here would be to run these forms, run these reports, gauge it out. Now, I had mentioned this, and I keep mentioning this because it's important. Speed is subjective. What's fast to you might be slow to the customer, right? 3 seconds is fast to me. 3 seconds might be slow for a customer. What might be slow for you might not be slow for a customer, right? I gave you that example last time about a report that took a long time, and now it's fine. So speed is in the eye of the beholder. So you want to not blow your budget on the beta, optimizing the hell out of things because you thought it was too slow, right? You have a 3 second rule maybe, and I notice this run 10 seconds, I'll go ahead and optimize it. You want to be careful and not fall into that trap of burning up the hours because, usually when you do these kind of engagements, you agree on the number of hours, right? I might say, okay, this is going to take me 40 hours to convert your database. Here I am, I'm at the beta stage. I got my first beta candidate, and I'm at 30 hours. That's not a good sign, right? It's not a good sign at all. Let's talk a little bit about that. Let me stop the sharing. When you are going through this beta process, right? Beta 1, beta 2, beta 3. We talk about rounds of optimization with our clients. We prepare our customers. We say, hey, this is what's going to happen. It's actually written into our proposals. Our proposals say it's going to take us rounds of optimization to get to the point, right? And so we make it a point not to spend a lot of hours for the first beta candidate because we want that customer to tell us where to optimize things. If you have a 40-hour project and it took you 30 hours to get the beta, you're already in trouble. Why? Because you need time to roll out, right? You need time to fix bugs. You need time to add maybe new features that they requested, right? You converted the access the database to SQL Server, but you forgot you needed to add a new feature or a new report that they asked for part of their proposal. And then when it comes time to roll this database out, you need time to cut over, upload data, verify. That takes time. It takes 2 or 3 hours, 6 hours, sometimes 8 hours, sometimes it takes the whole weekend. I spent the whole weekend migrating a large system of 19 database for a factory in Chicago that does casting. 19 databases. I spent the whole weekend in that factory. Me, the IT director, IT manager, additional programming staff, my staff. That was expensive. It took us a year to convert that system over, by the way. So that was a 6-figure project. My point is, you want to look at your hours, you want to budget accordingly, right? Make sure you have enough hours for what might happen later. And then once you roll it out, and we're going to talk about rollout, by the way, a little bit more next month in December. When you roll these things out, you also want to have a contingency plan, right? When things go wrong or something like that, have a contingency plan. All right. The fact is, if you want to get good at optimizing access with SQL Server Local or SQL Server Express or Azure, SQL Azure, you're going to have to become a SQL Server developer. You just have to. Which means you have to learn how to create views. You have to learn how to interpret the T-SQL code. You have to create store procedures. You may even have to create functions. You may even have to create CTAs. And so, we've gone as far as creating compiled libraries in SQL Server to optimize things, which is nothing more than the Visual Studio.NET code that's running inside SQL Server to address high-end data issues, right? It's a whole different topic. It's called CLR. You can look it up. I've only had to do it once, by the way. In the 30 years we've been here, we only had to do it once. But when you become there's several things you're going to notice in this journey that you're going to take. Is number one, you're going to love the tools. SQL Server Management Studio is a modern IDE that I wish we had in Access, right? We had equivalent in Access. You're going to love the IntelliSense. You're going to love how things easy it was. I show you a few things where I can select code, run just that code, right? I can do the dot and bring up additional fields and so forth. You're just going to love the experience. You're like, oh my gosh, this is what a modern coding platform looks like if we had this in Access, right? Number two, it's like riding a bike. Once you know how to ride a bike, you're going to continue riding that bike. You know how to run it, right? So once you get over your first project of converting Access to SQL Server, this is going to be something that you'll be able to apply and learn and improve upon over time. It's not that difficult. Trust me on this. If you follow my guidelines, if you read my posts, watch my videos, you'll be successful at this. And then you can always hit me up, right? You have my email address. You can always hit me up. I'd rather you hit me up with any questions you might have than having to spend 3 or 4 hours or even days trying to address it yourself, right? You're always welcome to hit me up. I'm sure I'm not going to reply back right away, but you can always hit me up and ask me questions. With the advent of AI, this has gotten a lot easier, right? I was working on a project this week for a government institution, which I can't name. I'll let your imagination run. 3-letter agency. And they hired me, and these guys literally have dozens and dozens of store procedures. And I just got tired of going into SQL Management Studio, opening the store procedure, finding the store procedure among hundreds of store procedures. I was like, I had to use filters. Let me share my screen again and show you what I'm talking about, because this is going to come in handy. All right, let's see here. Here we go. I'm going to close this, not save it. I'm going through some allergies and I got a stuffy nose. Okay. Now, I mean, this client has hundreds of views, hundreds of stored procedures. I mean, it's a massive system. It's all running Access. And what I needed to do is, and then again, they gave me a laptop. They shipped me a laptop. I brought it with me in Puerto Rico because it says you're going to connect to our network with our laptop. I'm like, okay, send it to me. And I'm looking at this laptop screen, and if you saw my setup here in Puerto Rico, you would see that I've got these huge monitors here because the guy with the biggest monitors wins. So I got two giant monitors. In fact, I can just turn this camera around. Maybe you can see my setup. There's monitor number one, and I've got monitor number two over here, right? The giant monitors. And right, and so what I do here is I have to use the filter function, right? So here I go into filter, see this little icon here. And I love this because you can do a process search, right? So I'm gonna say, okay, show me every table that contains orders. And then click on OK. And now I filter the list. Now I've got orders, right? So I would literally filter this. So I would step through this, filter the list, open the start procedure, analyze it. Then I have to close the window, go back to Access. I was just getting tired of it. So I just say, you know what? I'm just going to use AI to create a pass-through query that will retrieve the definition of that table, right? So for example, if I wanted to say, okay, show me script table as create to new query editor window, right? So this is going to create a script that I can take to another SQL Server or another database, execute the script. It'll actually create this table again for me in this other system, right? So this is all the code that goes into creating this table. I was using the same thing to get, okay, show me the details of the store procedure. So I just got tired of it. So I went to the AI. I'm going to start a new conversation. Always start a new conversation, by the way, when it's a different thing. And I say, okay, create a pass-through query. Create a T-SQL query. Here's the thing, by the way. And I don't know if let's just start from scratch here. Let's just give you some tips on using AI. Right? I have this conversation that starts that says, remember, I am a senior Access consultant. And I'm working on a Access to SQL Server project using Access and Office 3. I gotta tell it, what is all this stuff, right? So they can give me good answers. 365, not 365. Yeah, 365. And SQL Server. Gosh, what version of SQL Server? I even forgot what version of SQL Server I have. So I'm just going to create a new query. Select add version. All right, SQL 22. Go back here. Using SQL Server 2022. All right, now I've known in this chat, now it knows the parameters. So when I ask it to create a query, it's going to create a query that's compatible with SQL Server 2022, right? Make sense? So it's going to say something, okay, good for you. Glad you're working on this. Give me something to do, right? Basically, is what it's going to come back with. All right, so now it says create a T-SQL procedure I can run in Access pass-through query to retrieve the design of a table in SQL Server. Now, honestly, I didn't have to mention the pass-through query. I could have just said, do that, right? So I got the query here, and now I'll do the query. Now, come to think of it, it can just be a blank, right? So I can do this and it'll create this query that can run in Access. We have to talk about pass-through queries here in a second. But then I'm thinking to myself, okay, great, I can do this. Create author procedure, USB get table metadata, right? Whatever, okay. But really, what I want to do is have a subroutine in Access that can pass the table name to. It'll then create a pass-through query, right? And then show me, I can then bind that pass-through query to a form and then show the form, right? So three things. Create a procedure in VBA that can supply the table name that will then modify a pass-through query to retrieve that table's design through the pass-through query. And then I bind that pass-through query to a form in Access to retrieve that. So I'm not going to do all of that, but that's the gist of what I did earlier this week, with my client, with the three-letter agency. Create a VBA procedure. Create a procedure. Even though the spelling is not that difficult, by the way, it will know, even if you misspell this procedure, it knows what you're talking about. Create a VBA procedure that will take a table name as an argument. In my case, I use SQL Server procedure, but I'll use table name. And modify a, and that will update the SQL and a pass-through query called QRY table info. All right, they'll update SQL and pass-through query called table info, and then launch a form called FRM table info that I've bound that I've already bound to that query, right? I've already bound to the query. Oh, and by the way, if the form is open, close it. All right, because I want to. If you close the command open form, it'll just show you the form. It won't requery the form, right? Or maybe I can just refresh it. But I decided to close it. If the form is open, close it and reopen. I could have just requeried the form, but I'm just leave it like that. All right. So this is going to create a VBA procedure that I can then append to my Access database in a new module, existing module. Supply it a parameter. It'll go up the pass-through query, right? And then allow me to do that. VB.NET, no. I said, I don't know why I said VB.NET. Let me see if this is compatible with Access. Look like it is, Access code. All right, SQL, STR, USB, get table metadata, which is the correct procedure, right? Table name, update, pass-through query SQL, qdf.sql equals str.sql, qdf.close, manage the form state. If current project or form is loaded, then close it, open the form, clean up, on error, resume next, and so forth. Great. I mean, it's an amazing looking procedure, right? I love this. First of all, number one, I get some documentation up here at the top, right? That explains what the procedure is doing. Number two, properly tabbed, right? It's got the right tabs. On error, go to error handler. That's a nice little touch. I didn't tell it to do error handler. See, this is what's amazing about AI. I didn't mention anything about error handling. It already included in the procedure. But I didn't know, I had the wherewithal to say, hey, by the way, if the form is open, either close it or requery, right? So I'm going to say, modify the procedure to, instead of closing the form, it gets requeried, right? Or refreshed. Misspell requeried, it doesn't matter. It's going to understand what I meant. Now notice it already labeled the chat Access to SQL Server project based on my initial reminder thing, right? And then I got multiple chats here. I can always revisit this chat when I have something to do with this project. I've added a line to update the form caption dynamically. That's a nice little touch, right? Let's see how it handles the form being open. If is loaded, then open requery the data, update the title. Forms STR form, dot requery, caption, and sorry. I mean, I like that. I would have never bothered with a caption because this is my internal use, right? I'm not, it's something that I would do. Now, form is closed, open it, right? This is a pretty solid, simple procedure. It took all of 1 minute to do, right? And it took longer because I was explaining it to you guys. But it took a little bit more. I can just then click on this copy here, go to the Access, paste it into the new module. Look at this, consult implementation details, the requery method, updating the caption, auto receipt catching. If you find that the queries returns cache data, rare with pass-through queries, but possible, you can add a query defs. Well, then heck, let's just close the form, right? And just reopen it again. That's what we go back to the original procedure. Would you actively create the logic to export this specific table difference to a clean Excel file? No. Although it'd be interesting to see how it tackles that. Now, I've done this exercise since the beginning of ChatGPT in 2023, late 2023. I mean, this is barely released. I mean, when first the ChatGPT came out, it's only been a couple of years, maybe a year and a half, 2 years. Look how far we've gone, right? What's going to happen in 5 years from now? 10 years from now? 15 years from now? In the next 3 years, you're going to have what's called an AI architect of software, right? Not only right now, look how we use AI as a buddy system. It's like having another programmer sitting here at my desk. It's going to surpass that experience. It's going to become an architect, right? It's going to go from buddy programmer to senior level programmer to architect. With the advent of agents, have you heard a ton of things about agents? Now we're here to talk about the self-improving software, right? Once you have a delicate software system, now Access is not considered that. Let's just say it's a web-based project. You're going to have users submit bugs, right? And they're going to submit feature requests. What happens usually when you have that? You have an army of programmers. You have a project manager. He's doing triage. Okay, fix this bug, fix that bug. And we're going to launch this feature, right? And we're going to issue this feature to beta. All of that process I just mentioned, an army of developers and project managers are going to be replaced by an AI system that has multiple agents. You're going to have an agent, this is a software architect. You're going to have an agent that's looking through a bug board, assigning priorities to another agent, so multiple agents, to fix those bugs, and automatically overnight issue a new version, a new beta that will allow people to test. And then eventually it'll test it itself and know it's good. Eventually we'll get to the point where it's self-testing. So now you have an aggressive cycle where you have a span of 24 hours, new versions of your system, your platform, your worldwide platform just being launched. And now I started to see this stuff, by the way, in the browser. You know how you have the update button on the browser? Like almost every day I come in, click here to update to your browser. I know what's happening. They have these automated systems that are fixing bugs, right? So that will never happen with Access. But I have a chat in Access in February that you guys are going to love. We might even move that up to January, where you can actually use AI to help your program in Access. I hope you guys can stick around for that. All right, let's see here. I need to check the comments. I got lots of comments here. Wow, good. What size are the monitors? These are these are very large monitors there. I think it's 30 plus inches. Universal income. Okay, Malcolm. There's 3 things I never talk with clients: sports, religion, what's the third one? And politics. Does experience have any value when anyone can use AI to write these procedures and Yes, I just proved that. Millie. Because I told it, by the way, if the form is loaded, close the form, right? That was me. I probably should have tried the exercise first without telling it to the right, but I bring that experience to bear in terms of the UI, right? In terms of the UI experience I want for my people when they use the system. Mark B says, did I mention the database correlation differences between Access and SQL Server previously? especially since difference there in effect. Query view results, especially with predicate fields like tab 1000. Well, I have not mentioned any of that. This is an introductory course. That's a good point, Mark. This is an introductory course into Access SQL Server, and no, I haven't gotten into any collation differences between Access and SQL Server. But it's a good point. Somebody probably should, if you guys are getting to that point, then you can always use AI to talk about the collation difference between the two. Any questions so far? All right. Let's go here back to everyone. Any additional questions before we go? All right, so what did we learn tonight? We learned to create views. We can create a view several ways using the create view syntax and a SQL statement, right? We can create the view using QVE, query by example, where I created an alias for a column and I removed it and I can see how it looks, right, in the SQL code. We learned how to link the view back into into Microsoft Access. We talked about the benefits of views in terms of performance. A view that's used constantly will stay in memory. Even for the SQL Server Express, which only uses 1 gig of RAM, you still see that behavior, which is wonderful, right? So if you're having complaints from people, if you're having complaints of speed with people and you're using a query that's local in Access and not running off a SQL Server, you may want to consider moving that query to SQL Server. And speed is relevant, right? We talk about the software development cycle, how you migrate these large complex systems over into SQL Server. Okay, well, I saw some thumbs up. Thank you very much. If you really want to help me, please go into the LinkedIn group, Access with SQL Server LinkedIn group. If you're not a member of that, please join and leave a comment there so other people can see, hey, Juan, it was, leave a comment, whatever you want to say. If you want to say it was a terrible session, just say it's a terrible session. Or if you want to say it was a great session, say it was a great session. You guys missed something where we even use AI to do this or that. Leave comments for me, right? That will entice people to come to our next meeting. Now, next month is December. No, actually January, excuse me. This is December. But gosh, I'm tired. So in January, we're going to tackle store procedures. All right. Here's why I need you to do homework, right? You need to create views, link them into SQL Server, use AI to help you convert complex queries into T-SQL syntax. Always verify, right? How do I join LinkedIn group? Oh, that's great. Let me go ahead and show you real quick, guys. Thank you so much for volunteering. Before you go, if you haven't been in the LinkedIn group, let me show you where it's at. You have to apply. It's a closed group. The reason I did that is because I didn't want to, when I left it open, I had people, anybody could join, and then I had recruiters joining, and they're like posting jobs, and then you had a lot of spam. So I'm like, no, screw this. I'm going to close the group and then you're going to have to apply. So let me just bring this up here, Microsoft Edge. Let's see, work, okay. Share. Microsoft Edge and share. Here, if I go to groups, I have several groups that I own on LinkedIn. This is the biggest one with 1,000 members. All right, and here is, I'm going to pass this link over to you guys into the comments here, comments, chat, and paste it in here. Please join the group. You'll see that I promote the chat here. SQL Server Academy, you can leave a like, you can leave comments. So everybody left a couple of comments there. But I recall being the need to log into the AccessUserGroups right before last year. This appears to no longer be the case. Did you take the login away? I think you don't. I think you can still log in if you need to. I don't use the login. This is a good question, Jan. I'll reply back to you on that more. But basically, you don't really need to log in in order to learn information about the upcoming events. And then here you can post your questions, by the way, for other people to answer regarding your Access SQL Server project. All right, so look, I want to wish you guys, let's do a quick recap of the year. It's been a year since September, right? I usually don't have guests on these meetings. I love it, a lot of chapters like lunchtime and Europe. They're constantly looking for guests because probably because I have the gift of gab. I love talking. You put a quarter on me, I'll talk all night, right? But the fact is that this has been a year that's very satisfying for me because we are recertified as a data and AI partners. We've launched new groups in Australia and Italian this year. It's been quite the growth for the organization. I'm really happy, and we got lots of plans for next year. I'm working on an AI workshop that's coming to Akron, Ohio, hands-on laptop. We're going to go have people bring their laptops on March 13th. That's brand new and that hasn't been promoted yet. There's no sign-in registration form, but it's coming. If you're in Akron, Ohio, I'd love you guys to join us. So next month in January, we're going to tackle store procedures and the other topics, I think, to round out this academy. And then in February, I'm really coming back with an amazing AI. I mean, I hope you guys don't miss it because it's going to be groundbreaking, unbelievable, earth-shattering, how to use AI to actually program and access. So looking forward to showing that to you guys. Have a Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Feliz Navidad. Prospero año nuevo. Love you guys. Thank you for being here for me. Appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much, everyone. So long. See you.